a friend told me that if you want to succeed in investment banking, you need to be so greedy that you'd be willing to knock out your granny's tooth. The status quo has to change. We just can't continue going down the path we are.
On the back of this book, in bold, it says, it has become clear our current economic system is broken. Growth at all costs is unsustainable. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, we're staring it in the face.
Welcome to the Social Impact Journal. My name is Jack Farren and I'm your host. And this is the podcast where I talk to changemakers around the world driving social impact. This week is a special episode because we're talking about our first book review with author Arunjay Katakam. Arunjay, for the last 2 decades, has had a front row seat in finance and development, sitting on both sides of the coin, both rich and poor. And he's authored this book, Generation Hope, How Inclusive Economics Can Help Us All Thrive. Arunjay, thanks so much for coming on the show. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Jack. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So before we get into the book, which really excited, thanks so much for giving me a copy. I had the chance to read it and it was really, really informative. But let's go from the start. I know at 11 years old, you were trading snacks in your school. You went into investment banking and then you left investment banking for international development. So who is Arunjay?
Entrepreneurship came really easily to me at a very young age. I was trading snacks in boarding school. And, I was able to hoard snacks and then exchange it like 2 for 1. So I give you one just before we get the next quarter because you're so desperate and you'd give me 2 back, There was bad debts. Not everyone paid their dues. But, through when I was 13, I was doing other sort of entrepreneurial stuff, 16, 17. I was kind of really I would say, just natural inside, it came naturally. But at the same time, there's these 2 things. I had this desire to make millions as a result of it. At the same time, I couldn't ignore poverty. I grew up in India. It was, a lot of it on the roads everywhere. And it's just something that, didn't agree with me. And a lot of people said, oh, beggars don't work hard. They're just wanting a freebie kind of thing. And at that time, I bought into that because, that's what I was told. I was young. It somehow didn't I knew it was tugging at me. Is that really? And later, as I understood, the circumstances, the economy, and everything, I clearly understood that that's not really a choice. In some cases, you get pushed into all these things. It's a lack of opportunity, in that sense. So that, but this desire to make millions was so strong that it just, I kept going in that direction, on a path to investment banking. And it was in 2007, a friend told me that if you want to succeed in investment banking, you need to be so greedy that you'd be willing to knock out your granny's teeth and kind of melt the gold.
Wow.
If you have that level of greed, then that's for you. Wow. And I immediately knew, okay, no chance. I'm going to get eaten alive, and this is not going to kind of work out. And this was luckily just before the GFC. So I was, kind of very fortunate because I kind of left before all the madness happened. It would have been harder to leave a paycheck in a crisis than it was, sort of 6 months before that. And I started building, I just went into the startup world. I didn't quite figure out what I wanted to do, but financial inclusion kind of really resonated. So I started kind of looking into that. M-Pesa had just taken off. So I was kind of really, really interested in mobile money. And I built a startup around that. And then I just got more and more into the industry. And I joined the GSMA in 2013, kind of really going much deeper into it. And I've spent sort of the last decade and a little bit deeply in financial inclusion. But it was when the pandemic struck And I remember so clearly May 2020 when this realization dawned on me that even though in the last 10 years we added, we as in the whole industry, 500 million people to bank accounts, those they were all empty. And not only those accounts were empty, another two and a
Mm.
half, 3 billion people's accounts were also empty. And nobody had anything to fall back on. And that's when I realized that the problem was actually the economic model. And financial inclusion is good, it's the first step. But without economic inclusion,
Mm.
without giving people their fair share of, we're always going to have this lopsided world.
2007, you were in investment banking. So how far were you into your career? Like how many years have you been in the game for at that stage?
5 years, yeah.
5 years. And when your friend told you what you would need to be in terms of level of greed, how quickly were you gone, kind of, and looking at new opportunities?
Yeah, I think within 6 months.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know the exact
Mm, mm,
time frame as much, but it definitely it struck me. It was,
yeah.
it was really
Mm,
kind of like one of those moments when the light comes on and then
yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things in I found in my life, I've been fairly congruent to what I know, like taking actions based on
Mm,
the knowledge. So that was definitely one of those turning points.
awesome. Awesome. A few months ago, we did an episode on the rise of mobile money in Africa. But when you were looking at the financial inclusion space, what initially drew you to mobile money?
The ability for the technology to transcend and
Mm,
actually, so the business model was changing, the ability to actually serve people who were hard to reach at the time. At the time, just the ability to use, now we call them dumb phones, but like stick a phone to make a payment, receive a payment.
yeah.
I was fascinated with payments, even before that, like, and kind of understood the Visa model, the four-party model. Like, I was interested in payments
Mm,
as, I would say, an underlying thing, and so mobile money just kind of really was like, instead of doing conventional payments, I could do this thing that could actually also make an impact, make a difference.
yeah. Fantastic. So this is your book, Generation Hope. And I know it talks a lot about your financial inclusion journey, but so many other things. When did you actually have the idea to start writing a book, or even have started having ideas of I want to start writing a book?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, May 2020 was the genesis of realizing that this is something's wrong.
Mm,
And also, COVID was such a interesting period. I mean, difficult for so many, and I had my difficulties through that as almost, I mean, everybody. But by September 2020, I think that's when I started writing the book. The ideas are starting to formulate, and more than at that point, I actually didn't know what I wanted to write and what it needed. But I just had this really strong feeling that the status quo has to change.
mm,
We just can't continue going down the path we are. And and so that was kind of the motivation to write. And I find writing actually helps me crystallize my thoughts. It helps me do the research that otherwise I may not do. Like, it's a vehicle to kind of progress. And so, yeah, that was the start of it, and it took me like 3 years actually. Um I wrote my first book in 9 months. So this one, because comparatively that was a brain dump of what I knew, and this was like I was trying to answer much bigger questions
yeah.
that I didn't have the answers to. And and also, one of the key things I wanted to do was make this accessible. I really tried not to use any jargon, and where
Mm,
there are big kind of topics, I really try to simply explain them because I want it to be accessible. I think, the key to this is like people being able to read it and understand it, and,
mm,
like get empowered,
yeah,
and then, make choices, different choices, make the change that we all want to see.
for sure. So on the back of this book, in bold, it says it has become clear our current economic system is broken. Growth at all costs is unsustainable. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, we're staring it in the face, right? Like, the planet, like, there's no, I mean, some people still deny climate change and all of this, but I mean, it's all around us. Fires, flooding, all of this. And I mean, we know. I mean, like, you can't just keep putting CO2 on and all the, pollution gases and like all of this carbon, everything into the atmosphere and
Mm.
expect nothing to change. And we're at this point where, I mean, the scientists, the IPCC, all of them are saying, oh, we are at grave danger. And growth at all costs goes absolutely in the face of it. It's just saying, well, profit matters more than planet. Profit matters more than people. Like, I mean,
Mm.
the entire gig economy, I think of it as algorithmically dehumanizing people, because there's, as much as Uber says, oh, the partner, they're self-employed, the only thing they can do is switch on and off the app, but they can't choose their rides. Like, the
Mm.
algorithm decides when they're going to get a job,
Yeah.
like, so the growth, I mean, I think growth is important. I don't think we're at this stage yet for, post growth, degrowth, all of that.
Mm.
UBI is great when we can make that happen.
So
um,
just what is UBI?
oh, sorry, universal basic
Mm.
income. Yeah. So I do believe that, at some point or some level, like, having a basic income is definitely a good thing. And universal basic services as well, which we have a
Mm.
lot of in the UK, the NHS, primary and secondary education and housing and other things, also very valuable, very helpful for society to kind of level up, or, give opportunities to those who don't have them.
Mm.
But equally, we as a society, there's a lot of change that needs to happen before, we're kind of ready for that. So in the meantime, what we need is sustainable growth.
Mm.
Growth which is, the triple bottom line: people, profit, and planet, rather than just profit. And we also need, to not just pollute as in what we wish, like, so we need to be responsible about it,
Yeah.
whether we're building a business or whether we are on the consumer side. I think, on both sides of the equation.
Mm. You touched a lot, in I think chapter 5 and chapter 6 of the book on the scarcity and abundance mindset.
Yeah.
So how would you define those two terms?
Yeah, I mean, in 2017, I think, it was, I met someone, and I did a financial course, and it was in through that I understood, um this difference in a scarcity and a abundant mindset. Although that was not what the course was about, but it helped me think about it. And then, once that kind of clicked in my head, I started working towards kind of letting go, because scarcity is like, there's not enough, and so we need to accumulate, and we just need more, 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 more. And there's one study that I found, and I quote in the book, where, you know how much is enough. And the study, interviewed 2,000 people, and they found that everyone, regardless of how much money they had, wanted 2 to 3 times more.
Wow.
So if you had 100,000, you thought, if I have 200, 300,000, that
Mm.
would be great.
Mm.
And if you had 10 million, you wanted 20 or 30 million, like, so this is like a very
Yeah.
interesting thing. So, because there's never enough, right? Like,
Mm.
otherwise, why would people be, kind of keep on going and going and going? Um, and so that was kind of helpful for me to think about, because I was like, so why do I want all these millions? Because
Mm.
it's the first time I questioned that, having carried it for like 30 years of as an ambition. And I knew, coming back to the poverty, and I really wanted to help people, and that's why I ended up in financial inclusion. But even there, I was trying to build, sort of, I was, venture building startups, doing all these things in inclusive fintech. But I found that, you have to basically have to be a unicorn if you want to get funded, and not be, but try to be a unicorn.
Yep.
And in doing that, like, you're either charging these poor people too much money, or you mission drift. Like,
Yep.
one of the two happens, because there's no way. I mean, how do you become a unicorn? Like, you need, of course, a massive scale, but you can still charge a lot less for
Yeah.
what you are charging.
Sorry, an inclusive fintech.
Yeah.
So you said you're building those types of ventures. So what would that actually mean? An inclusive fintech?
Those are fintechs that are looking to create more inclusivity. So the ones that target those who are underserved, essentially. I would broadly categorize it that way.
So you're saying, so in terms of attracting finance to be, to try and be a unicorn, to be funded.
Yeah.
What were the challenges you saw?
I mean, I just saw that the mission drift was the most often the case, because you just couldn't extract what you needed to extract from these people. They just didn't have the wherewithal to pay that kind of money, or really. So, or in the case like where M-Pesa, like, they are extracting it because they're so well kind of entrenched, but it's 2 to 3% on a domestic transfer. And here in the UK, it's zero, and in many countries in the world, it's zero. But so it's like a poverty premium, a poverty tax, like, the poorer you are, the more you pay for these services. And in that just was something that I found, okay, I can't be part of this anymore. Like, I am, I want to solve poverty. I want to help people live a better life. Yet I found I was part of the problem. By wanting to make millions, I was squarely actually not solving any of this, but actually perpetuating the problem. And that was a hard realization.
So just to kind of get into your mind at that stage, what year was that when you had that idea?
So actually, it was all around so when COVID happened, because I was venture building at the time, and I sort of interviewing farmers for one startup and gig workers for another startup. Here, the gig workers was lending money to them, and when COVID happened, so the gig worker economy, like, all of the restaurants, all that, it kind of dried up.
Yep.
And a lot of the gig workers started going to the supermarket platforms. And I remember interviewing this one guy who said, our commissions have been decreased because there are a lot more gig workers, and the orders have doubled or tripled. So before, people bought, like, the basket size was much smaller. And he's, was in India and riding a two-wheeler, and now he's got, like, so much more to put on it because the orders have increased, and he's earning less commission. So he was working longer hours to kind of make the same money. And I was like, this can't be right. This is really a problem here. But I could see why the platforms were doing it, because that's their route to profitability, route to increased valuations, all of that. So it just became, like, really clear, this, the problem here. And at that point, I decided I just needed to do something different. And
Yes. So what were you thinking at that stage? What were some of the pathways you were looking at to change your approach, or how to spend your time in a different way?
So it just struck me at the time, nonprofit was the way to go. I started looking into some of these models. So John Lewis, Vanguard, and a few of these co-op type models, where the profit or the surplus is better shared, because it's not looking to be extracted in the same way. And so, I think that was kind of where I was thinking, and kind of at the same time, I had the opportunity to join the UN, and so I decided to do that at that point in time. But I also, continued working on the book and thinking about these ideas and really trying to find what I wanted to do, next.
So you mentioned a non-profit startup. So that's
Yeah.
maybe a term that not everyone is so familiar with. So what does that actually mean?
So I think, I really believe in the startup philosophy and the way of, innovating using a startup. Um, I mean, the funding models are still kind of problematic, but the actual way in which you go about building an MVP, getting product market fit,
Mm.
really meeting customers' needs, so finding, a solution to what customers needs is definitely kind of the way to innovate and the way to take solutions to market.
Mm.
But why does it all have to be for profit? And why does it especially have to be for super profits?
Mm.
And that's it's kind of where the question came, and that's the change that I decided to make personally. And I think I'm really enjoying that. It's a huge. Ever since I kind of gave up this idea of making millions, um, I feel so much more relieved and happy, and because I'm not chasing something anymore that you know is I mean, maybe it would have been out of reach for my whole life. Maybe I would have got it in 10 years or 20 years. I don't know. And all I wanted to do with that money was help people anyway. So I was like,
Yeah.
well, I can just shortcut that whole process. And so no equity, but everything else is kind of the same. And yeah, so I think of them as nonprofit startups.
So now you said you're helping to build non-profit startups and ventures. So what does that look like in practice in terms of models? How would you approach that? Let's say if there's an individual out there that is looking at a startup and says, "I'll do it as a non-profit." What are those first steps?
So I think a lot of the steps are similar, especially early on. The big difference is the way you approach funding, and even that process is similar, as
Mm.
from your experience. But instead of pitching VCs, you're pitching philanthropic capital fund, the philanthropic capital. So that's the fundamental difference, and the big benefit from that is there's a huge amount of alignment with a funder who's providing you capital for social change, social impact. Um, the problem with all of the impact investors, you know, I, I I find just Acumen is one of the only impact investors because they actually use philanthropic capital. They make those investments. They have very patient. They can afford not to get a return on it even.
Mm.
Whereas many of the other impact investors are actually VCs who say they impact. And so they're looking for the gigantic return and the impact. It's like, which
You can't
is
have your cake and eat it. Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, I think the funding model is the
Mm.
biggest
Mm.
difference. I think the rest of it I think of very much in the same way in the way you would go about building product, building product market fit effectively, trying to solve because I think of it and when it comes to building a startup, whether for profit or not, really three categories. One is candy, which is nice and not particularly good for you. The other is like a vitamin, which is good but not needed, and the third is a painkiller. And I think you really want to be in that third category because then you're really solving a problem worth solving.
Mm.
And there's a lot of pain for your customer. They're feeling that pain, and you're actually making that difference in their lives. So I think if you kind of use those three buckets to kind of see where your solution lies and the problem
Yeah.
you kind of want to solve, and then so you can be for profit, you can be not for profit, and you can also be somewhere in the middle, which is like kind of a B Corp, where you can be for profit but also not for kind of extreme profit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I personally, not for profit is where I'm happy with and where I want to be. But equally, I think B Corps are great. And
Mm.
that's just another kind of space as well. For it depends on really what you're trying to build and things like that.
Do you see any trends in the last few years, post COVID, or um, entrepreneurs that are looking at this route, or is it still quite early days?
Yeah, I mean, it's there. There are a few people. I mean, when we first spoke and I
Yeah.
realized you were building a nonprofit startup, it was just amazing.
Yeah.
I can't say off the top of my head. I know like half a dozen more people.
Yeah.
But there are, there is momentum building around this. There's definitely people want to do more things with impact. Whether it's through their jobs, whether it's building
Mm,
businesses. I think as a generation, like we want our lives to matter. We want to do something that makes a difference, makes an impact. And so that I would say would be the overarching mega trend. And then these things fall out of it.
yeah. So your day-to-day work now, how are you helping non-profit startups, and how are you building these
So
ventures?
yeah, I'm building. So I'm doing a few things. So building the Inclusive Action Lab, which is my nonprofit startup,
Mm,
and it looks at the next generation of digital public infrastructure. So the way I see it, like India has done an incredible job building digital public infrastructure, identity payments, and data exchange. Um, but as an analogy, it's like saying the US put landlines in everyone's house in the 80s. So when you go to Africa in the 1990s and the 2000s, you're not trying to put a landline in everyone's house. You give them mobile technology. And so trying to replicate what India did in all of Africa would be the same as trying to put landlines in.
mm, mm,
So we need to see technology has evolved, lots of things have evolved, and we need to find a more efficient way of implementing digital public infrastructure on the African continent that doesn't necessarily have to look like India.
yep,
So that's broadly, but the driver for this is economic inclusion.
mm,
I mean, DPI has helped hugely, both in India and Brazil, and other markets that have used it. Through COVID, India was able to use the infrastructure to make all the payments. A lot of subsidy payments, a lot of payments to people who needed the money. At the same time, the US was sending checks to dead people. So there was this real. You could see this contrast between the technology in India and the clunkiness of the US system.
mm, mm. So that's Inclusive Action Lab. Sorry,
Yeah.
your non-profit startup, and there's also at the back of the book, join #GenHope. So what does that
Yes.
mean?
Well, I think Gen Hope is the broader movement. So each of us has the ability to make the changes we want to see. The I've been vegetarian for 20 years, and 10 years ago I struggled to get a good vegetarian dish in a restaurant, even in London. 5 6 years ago that started to change, and now I'm spoiled for choice.
Mm,
I can at least three things, and this is veganism. Like it's because you know millions of people decided to become vegan, and that restaurants have had to adopt their practices and change their menus. The same way, every decision we make, collectively, can impose those sort of broader changes on the market, on the industry. So if we decide not to buy from a certain brand, or certain, it does impact them. And so I think that for me, hope stems from each action we take. And I think this is important, because this is what for me gives me sort of that hope and belief that
mm,
we can make a difference. Otherwise, it's kind of like a lost cause. You think like we're doomed, the climate's going to collapse, the planet's going to, like be inhabitable. In fact, I went for a talk and they were talking about like not having kids, like human extinction,
mm, mm.
because the situation is so bad that why would you want to bring, have children and bring the kids into this world, and all of that. And I mean, that's like really depressing, and I, but equally, that is where we're headed if we don't make the changes,
Mm.
that we need. So, I think Gen Hope is really about us coming together. So it starts with small actions, small things that we can do to change our own lives, and then collectively the ripple effect.
Yeah. So there's a question I asked to all of my guests, and I say if you have your own social impact journal to write a page in a book, but you've written about 350 pages. But if you can just write one page for the social impact journal, and you're talking to someone in Gen Hope, and it's about those small actions that they can take, what would you write in that page for them to read?
Every one of us has a unique ability. We all matter. We all have a talent. We can do something with that. And so finding the triangulation between, what really we're good at, what motivates us, and how we can make that difference is, so when you talk about purpose and, sort of impact, I think it's bringing these pieces of the puzzle together. And then just being curious, just asking the questions and being willing to get it wrong, because so many people say, I don't know my purpose, I can't figure out what to do, but they don't do anything to find that out.
Mm.
And you kind of have to kiss many frogs before you figure it out, or like, and sometimes it comes more naturally and you can do it, but other times so follow that, follow your curiosity, follow that through. And then when you find it, then you can actually look at ways to scale the impact.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, there's a huge community, I mean, you're part of it, and lots and lots of people, all of the listeners as well, interested in social impact.
Yep.
Sort of plugging into that community. And the other thing is, if you don't know, you're not, you don't have to be able to build a business. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. You can also volunteer. You can work in these within the community with other people, and just actually really make that impact. So I think for me, it's kind of.
Brilliant. That's a good page. So where can we pick up a copy of the book?
Yeah, I think so. I want to say first, on my website, arunjay.com, they is one of the places where you can get it. Most importantly, for those who can't, sort of buy it, you can request a free copy. All of the profits go to Acumen, and the other place, which is easy in some ways to get, is Amazon. But you'll find, like in the book, I talk about it, I'm not a big fan. So it's there because it's accessible to people, and so if people want to buy it off Amazon, I mean, it's fine by me. But yeah, so either of those two places.
Brilliant. And I think final question is, I think you touched on Acumen and their impact investing approach that you like, but why did you decide that Acumen would be the organization that you support with the profits from the book?
Yeah, so in 2019, I discovered Acumen kind of by accident, and I was like, okay, yeah, someone's actually really trying to solve poverty. And it was something like I wanted to do, but at the time I wasn't doing anything to really solve it.
Mhm.
And so I started contributing like a monthly donation, to them. And then in 2021, they contacted me and said, hey, you've been doing this. Do you want to be more involved? And so I said, yeah, sure. And so I joined one of their programs called Acumen Next, and got, sort of more involved, and then really understood deeper also the philosophy and what they're kind of doing. And Jacqueline Novogratz is just this amazing person, amazing human, and what she's done like is a huge inspiration. And I think one of the things actually I realized, like, someone like her, she could have built a for-profit business. She could have
Mm.
made a unicorn, decacorn, like, but she chose to build a not-for-profit business 20 years ago. Like, we're doing it now, but like, this is like, totally pioneering stuff. Like 20 years ago,
Mm.
no one was really thinking of building these, sort of in the way she did. And so all of these things, like mainly solving poverty, but also, being inspired by Jacqueline, I think, sort of, and I wanted to, I didn't want to make money off this book. The message of this book is to kind of move from scarcity to abundance, kind of not try to extract everything, do either a B Corp or non-profit startup if you're entrepreneurially inclined.
Mm.
And just making money off that didn't kind of fit. So and I wanted to give away the profits, and Acumen just was a really good fit for me.
Awesome. Well, Arunjay, thanks so much for coming on the show, talking about your new book and your illustrious career. If anyone wants to connect with Arunjay, we'll include your social media handles in the show notes. And thanks for coming on again.
Thanks so much, Jack. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching this week's episode. If you did enjoy it, please share with your colleagues and friends, and make sure to subscribe or follow to all of our channels. See you next Monday for the next episode of the Social Impact Journal.